In the NFL, the name of the game is taking advantage of the opportunities that are presented to you. But for one Detroit Lions player, he hasn't had many opportunities yet. But now, there's a chance that he might just become an important weapon for the Lions. We're going to talk about it in today's episode, folks, so stay tuned.
What are we? What makes us what we are and what we're going to be? It's grit. It's what we started with last year, guys. Doesn't matter if you have one ass cheek and three toes. I will beat your ass.
Can definitely compete with the big dogs.
10-5 end zone touchdown Detroit Lions.
You guys are unbelievable, man. I'm telling you.
We are driven by Detroit.
Hello, all Lions fans, and welcome on back to yet another episode of MCM Motor City Mania. I'm your host, David T. Pike, and as always, we're diving on in. So, here's the thing, folks. Like I said in the intro, in the NFL, well, realistically in life in general, everything is about taking advantage of the opportunities that are presented to you. You have to take a hold of opportunities. You have to make the most of them. And when you think about it, sometimes you might only get one opportunity. Now, what exactly is that in relation to today's episode? Well, here's the thing, folks. When we take a look at the Lions this offseason, they have been extremely active in adding to the roster, reinforcing the roster. They have done a lot of things this offseason, whether it's through free agency, whether it's through the draft, whether it's through, what they've already been doing with the current roster that they have. I mean, for crying out loud. They've signed DJ Reader. They signed Kevin Zeitler. They drafted Terry and Arnold. They drafted Enos Rakestraw. They traded for Carlton Davis. They extended Amon-Ra St. Brown and Penei Sewell and Jared Goff. Obviously, there's many more examples of this, but those are the major ones. Those are the big moves that the Lions have realistically made this offseason. Now, the reason why we're talking about this in the context of opportunities is this. Despite the moves that I just mentioned, some Lions fans, I'm going to say this right now, have not been satisfied or thrilled to a certain extent with the fact that certain positions on the roster have not been addressed to the, full scope and depth of what they would like to have been done. Such positions that I can think of are the kicking position. Another position is the edge rushing position that I just talked about in my previous episode. However, one position that is kind of in a peculiar spot in relation to what a lot of people are thinking is the fact that there are some people that want the Lions to go out and add another wide receiver, a seasoned wide receiver. Now, why is that the case? Well, the reason that's the case is because one of our most seasoned wide receivers that we had on the roster has gone. That's Josh Reynolds. He left this offseason to go to the Denver Broncos, as we already know. Now, with Josh Reynolds leaving in free agency to go to Denver, what that does and what that did is it has now a huge chunk of offensive production that's now missing. Because now you have to find somebody, you have to find someone who can fill into that spot, that fills into that role to take care of that production that you just lost with Reynolds leaving. So, now you got to try and find someone to make up that difference. That's in essence what the Lions are having to do. That's what the Lions are thinking of. And that's what some Lions fans are wanting the Lions to do. They want to find another veteran wide receiver to go out, bring in, and fill that role that Josh Reynolds is vacating. And many people thought, they expected, that Brad Holmes was going to bring in somebody to replace him sometime during this offseason. But as we've now seen throughout the passing of the offseason, Holmes has passed both in free agency and in the draft to acquire any sort of new real wide receiver talent. Oh, sure, he's added some undrafted free agents, but the fact of the matter is that he's passed up on a lot of top guys that could potentially come in and could fill in for Josh Reynolds' spot. And on top of that, there were a lot of intriguing rookie prospects that were in this draft. Brad Holmes decided to pass on quite a lot of them. I mean, there was options out in the draft where he could have gone and, got maybe a Luke McCaffrey or Brendan Rice. Those guys were both very much available late into the draft, process. So Brad Holmes decided not to go after any of those guys. So obviously, the lack of any serious wide receiver talent that's, been acquired this offseason, in my opinion at least, means that Holmes and Campbell like what they realistically already have on the roster, and they're currently going to run with what they have on the roster. Or the other side of that coin could mean that there was people out in the market, they recognized that, but they didn't like anybody enough to bring them in because, again, they liked what they had on the roster. So either they liked more what they had or just didn't like anybody outside enough. Either way, it doesn't really matter, but if I had to realistically take an opinion of it, I think it's rather the former than the latter. Now, currently, if we take a look at the Lions roster, obviously, there's a whole bunch of people on the roster because we're going into camps, we're getting all of these offseason activities going. It's going to be literally swollen with a whole bunch of different people. And for wide receivers, the Lions currently have 12 wide receivers on the roster. That's obviously not going to be the way it is once we get to the regular season. That number is going to get cut by about 5 to 6. But the real question, as many Lions fans are now wondering, is who is most likely to become wide receiver number 3 for the Detroit Lions? Because we already know who's wide receiver 1 and 2. That's Amon-Ra St. Brown, and that's Jameson Williams. Those are your number 1 and number 2 guys. But who's number 3? Well, for me, the best candidate to fill in for number 3, to fill in Josh Reynolds' spot, is wide receiver Donovan Peoples-Jones. Now, some people may ask why I would choose Donovan Peoples-Jones over guys like Antoine Green, who we drafted, last year. What about Khalif Raymond, who's been very reliable for us, or other guys that we have on the roster, whether it's one of the undrafted free agents or, maybe somebody else? Well, I have my specific reasons. Here are the reasons as to why I believe Donovan Peoples-Jones is the best candidate to fill in for Josh Reynolds, of which I have, I think, either 2 or 3 reasons, but there's quite a lot of information that goes into them. So let's take a look at the first reason here. The first reason as to why I think Donovan Peoples-Jones is the best candidate that the Lions have to fill in for wide receiver number 3, to fill in Josh Reynolds' role, is because out of all the wide receivers that are realistically on the roster, Donovan Peoples-Jones, I'm just going to go DPJ, he has the most experience being a main wide receiver in terms of overall in the NFL, but he's also got the most experience with the Lions out of anybody on the roster that I realistically think could fit into that spot. You have to think about it here. DPJ actually has quite a lot of good experience when it comes to playing in terms of both quality of, stats and also in terms of quantity of stats and in terms of the production that he's put up. Overall, if you take a look at, I would say, the whole body of work that DPJ has, his stats aren't necessarily impressive. But to also be entirely fair, he's only been in the league, I think, this is going on his 4th year, and he hasn't been really a quote-unquote full-time starter every single year. But there was one particular season when DPJ really had a stellar outing, and that was in 2022 when he was with the Cleveland Browns. In the 2022 campaign, he had a really stellar season. If you take a look at that season, in 2022, DPJ had 61 receptions, he had 839 yards, he had 13.8 average a catch, 3 touchdowns, and he caught 63.5% of the balls that were thrown his way. That's a very productive season. That is an extremely productive season for a guy who was drafted in the 6th round and was considered to be most likely a backup quality kind of player. To go out and have a near 1,000-yard season, that's a pretty impressive accomplishment. Now, we're talking about DPJ taking over for Reynolds. That's what we're talking about here. So I decided to say, okay, let's take a look at how Josh Reynolds has done in his career. Because obviously, we're trying to compare him. We're trying to see if DPJ can do better than what Josh Reynolds did. Which, if you take a look at Josh Reynolds' career in terms of the overall body of work that he's put out, plus the best season that he had with the Detroit Lions, this is what you get to see. The best season that Josh Reynolds ever had in his career in terms of overall production, you go back to 2022, and I'm talking about yards, I'm talking about catches, I'm talking about everything. You take a look in 2020, in the season he was with the Rams, he had 52 receptions, 618 yards for 11.9 in average, 2 touchdowns with a 64.2% catch percentage rate. Pretty solid season. Not necessarily like a super great season, but it's solid. His best year with the Lions was obviously last year, 2023. In 2023, Reynolds put up 40 receptions for 608 yards, had a 15.2 average a catch. He had 5 touchdown receptions for a 62.5% reception rate. Now, When you take a look at both sets of those numbers that I just put up for Josh Reynolds, you're going to notice something that's very, very straightforward about both of them. Number one, the guy is very consistent when it comes to the amount of yards he's putting up. He's very consistent for the most part in the amount of balls that he is catching, and he's usually a very reliable target for catching passes. However, though, I will state this. If you take even both of those seasons and you then stack them up compared to what DPJ did in 2022, DPJ clearly beats out Josh Reynolds. Again, Josh Reynolds' best season was with 618 yards. Freaking DPJ outdid that by 200. You take a look at the catch percentage. That's right on mark with what Josh Reynolds has done in the past. And again, you take a look at the 3 touchdowns. That's right in the middle between 2 and 5. So again, what I'm seeing here is that not only can DPJ get more production in terms of overall yards, but he can match pretty much what Josh Reynolds has done in the past, whether it was with the Lions last year or earlier on in his career when he was with the Rams. So my whole point is this. From a production standpoint, DPJ can definitely fill the role of what Josh Reynolds used to do. That's my first point here. Now, I'm going to just put this out there because I believe, and when you take a look at stats, you also have to take a look at the overall context of what was going on the year that the stats happened. When you take a look at DPJ, he put up that season that I'm talking about, the 839 some odd yards in 2022 when he was with Cleveland. In 2022, the Cleveland Browns' quarterbacks were Jacoby Brissett and Deshaun Watson. And Deshaun Watson, that was the year he had come back after being suspended and all that time due to the whole massage nonsense. I like to call him Massage Watson because that's what he's now forever going to be known for. The whole point of the matter is that you had Deshaun Watson, who was coming off of a long period of inactivity because he wasn't playing, so he was crap. Jacoby Brissett is primarily more of like a solid backup option, but he's not a guy you should probably want to start long term. So DPJ, in the season that he played the best, he was dealing with a rather subpar quarterback group. Now you have him working with Jared Goff. Jared Goff is a top 10 quarterback. Jared Goff took the likes of Josh Reynolds and he made him into a very, very solid receiver. Jared Goff worked with Amon-Ra St. Brown, a 4th-round wide receiver, and made him into a top 10 wide receiver. Jared Goff worked with Sam Laporta and turned him into a top 3, arguably one of the best, if not the best, tight end in the league right now. So you've now got DPJ working with Jared Goff, and Jared Goff has shown over the last 2 years just how damn good, how prolific of a quarterback he can be, and we know about his ability to develop chemistry very quickly with the wide receivers that he's working with. So for me, it's like, listen, if DPJ can put up that kind of a season with Brissett and Watson as his quarterback, imagine what he could get out of working with Jared Goff. And obviously with having Ben Johnson being the offensive coordinator, calling plays, scheming plays for whatever he wants with DPJ, that for me tells me that DPJ could more than amply fill the void that Reynolds is leaving behind. So that's that whole first point. Quite a lot of information in there. Now we take a look at the second point here. The size, the measurables, the use of offense that you know Reynolds versus DPJ. So here's the first thing. When you take a look at Josh Reynolds, according to all the measurables I could find, he's 6'3". He's about almost 200 pounds, 194 pounds. He ran a 40 combine time of 4.52. He has a vertical of about 37 inches. He had a 20-yard shuttle of 4.13, and he had a broad jump of 10 feet 4 inches. So you've got a very solid set of numbers there from Reynolds. You then take a look at DPJ. DPJ is an inch shorter than Josh Reynolds, but he's significantly bigger. He's almost, I think 16, almost 20 pounds heavier than freaking what Josh Reynolds was. So the guy is about the same height, but he's much more thick. He's much more built, which means you have less of an injury concern. One of the things that Reynolds had to deal with a little bit while he was here in Detroit was constantly a little underlying, nagging injuries. So for the realistic part on my end, DPJ shouldn't have that problem as much. You take a look at the 40 time. Donovan Peoples-Jones, he's a little bit faster than Reynolds, 4.48 compared to 4.52. The vertical, 44.5, absolutely blows Reynolds out of the water. He didn't run a 20 shuttle time, and his broad jump was much better than freaking Reynolds. He jumped 11 feet 7 inches. So again, a full foot more than what Reynolds did. So what you're seeing there between Reynolds and Donovan Peoples-Jones, you're seeing a guy in Donovan Peoples-Jones who is pretty much the same speed. He's a little bit faster, but he's much more explosive in terms of the vertical and in terms of the broad jump. Then you take a look at how both of these guys have been primarily used over the course of their career. Josh Reynolds primarily has been used on the outside. He's been used out wide. 68.2% of his time playing has been used on the outside, whereas he's only been in the slot 31.3% of the time. You take a look at DPJ, he's been used on out wide at 72.2% of the time and lined up in the slot 27.7% of the time. Again, what you're seeing is that both of these guys, when you measure them up both physically in terms of what they are as far as height and weight, in terms of how they run, how they're able to execute and do things on the field, they measure up pretty well, and DPJ actually measures out a little bit better. But they also are used primarily the same way in offenses. They're used outside primarily more, but they also can drop into the slot and can still be just as productive. So again, for me, it's like, okay, you have a guy that measures up very, very well, in fact, a little bit better than Reynolds. He's used in the same way that Reynolds was used. That right there is kind of like 1 + 1 = 2. We're kind of moving in that direction. So for me, it's like, hey, you've got a guy that fits how the player has been used, as such as Reynolds, in the past. And then you have to think about it from this perspective. This is how I'm going to end this whole episode. You have to take a look at how having DPJ fill in for Reynolds, it maintains the dynamic of the offense that the Lions have had over the last couple of years. Think about it. The Lions wide receiver core has been made up by three main components. First and foremost, you have a speedy wide receiver, a deep threat, somebody who can take the top off of a defense. Last year, that was Jamo. The year before that, it was DJ Chark because Jamo was out most of the year with an injury. Then you have the guy who's kind of like the jack of all trades, the all-around wide receiver. That's Amon-Ra St. Brown. That's his role. Nobody else has really touched it, and he most deservedly has earned that role. But then you have the intermediate wide receiver, the possession wide receiver. For the last 2 years, that's been Josh Reynolds' spot. He's the guy that will go over the middle. He'll catch those intermediate routes that Jared Goff likes to throw quite a bit, and he's the possession guy. He's not going to burn anybody, but he's a solid receiving option. Well, now Reynolds is gone. That's why I'm presenting that Donovan Peoples-Jones is the best likely candidate to fill in for that spot, because the stats measure up to exactly what Reynolds has done in the past, and the measurables measure up to what Reynolds has done in the past. So for me, it's like, listen, the Lions, the reason why I think they haven't gone out and gotten a wide receiver or made a move for a wide receiver is because they're seeing the same thing I'm seeing. This is a guy that does exactly the same thing that Reynolds does. He's a little bit bigger, he's a little bit more explosive, a little bit faster, but yet he does the exact same thing. He knows how to play that position. He knows how to fill in that role. So why go out and try and find somebody new when you've already got a guy that's already on the roster? And let's put it this way, just to kind of round it up, significantly cheaper than what Reynolds was. Reynolds signed a 2-year, $9 million contract with the Broncos. DPJ's contract is a 1-year, $1.3 million contract. I guarantee you this, you are not going to find anybody out on the free market that's going to be cheaper for that and at the same time be able to do the same kind of job that what DPJ most likely will be able to do. It's a match made in heaven. You're getting a reliable wide receiver in Peoples-Jones who's not getting paid a whole lot and will be able to do what the Lions ask him to do. It's a match made in heaven, in my opinion. That's why I think the Lions haven't made a move to try and find another wide receiver. That's just my personal opinion. But anyway, I decided to put this episode together because I think that DPJ is about to have himself a really, really big year. I think he's going to become a massive weapon for the Lions. And I think that this overlooked guy that we've had on the roster the last year, he's about to get his time to shine and about to be stepping out into the sun and doing some really great work for us. But you guys let me know what you guys think. You always do. Just keep it respectful. I ask that only. And with that being said, I'm going to end the segment and say thank you all for watching in another episode of MCM Motor City Mania. If you like what you saw, by all means, highly encourage y'all to watch the next episode. Also encourage y'all to do one of these 3 things: like, comment, and subscribe. If by chance you subscribed in the past and forgot to do so at the time, or you just subscribed and not had a chance to do so, again, please subscribe. It helps out the channel. But I also encourage y'all, please, that after you subscribe, make sure you hit that bell notification icon as well. It's right next to that button. So that way you guys never miss any more content that I push out. We want you guys coming back as much as possible. Turning on that notification icon helps that out immensely. I also encourage y'all, please share this content with your Lions friends and family members. Share here on YouTube, share it on Twitter, share it on Facebook, share it anywhere and everywhere that you possibly can, so that way we can continue to help the channel grow and spread. And with that being said, to everybody, I hope you all are having a great day. Hope you all have something that makes you happy and makes you smile. And I hope you all enjoyed the content. God bless. And until the next time we meet, I'll see you all in the next episode.